Good evening, everyone. We're just gonna wait a couple seconds to let everybody in. It's nice to see everyone's faces. However, I'm gonna ask that if you are not a panelist that's speaking, if you could actually turn off your camera, that would actually make it easier for everyone to kind of, well, we would save bandwidth, but it'll make it easier for us to focus on the speakers tonight as well. Thank you.
Okay.
And we're just gonna wait a second before I get started. All right. Thank you. Thanks to those of you who came in at about 5:50 and have been waiting all this time. And for waiting while we worked out a couple of the kinks. My name is Kathy Muchapau. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, also known as MRAC. As I've said before, thank you for joining us as we hear from 4 of our MRAC board members tonight. I want to note that we have a live captioner, or we have someone doing live captioning that's being provided for us. And you can activate that by going to the CC at the bottom of your screen and just clicking on that, and then you should have an option to activate that. And you'll see also in the chat that the captions can be viewed either in Zoom by doing what I just instructed you on, or our captioner just put a link in there that can put the captions in a separate browser for you if you prefer to view the captions that way. So many of you probably already know this, but MRAC's mission is to improve arts access to communities in the 7-county metropolitan area through support to artists and organizations. And we primarily do this through grant making and funding arts access throughout the entire region. And like all nonprofits, we have a board of directors that serve as our governing body. For MRAC, this includes making final decisions on funding recommendations that are made by community members like yourselves and then carried out by staff. I would say from my position, the MRAC board also serves as an important thought partner with the MRAC staff and really helps us to make good decisions to ensure that we're making the best decisions to advance our mission in the metro. So they govern definitely, but they are really our eyes and ears on the ground as well to help us make informed decisions. So tonight we've invited 4 of our 18 board members to have a conversation about like the arts community in general. What are the things that they've seen? What are the things that they're thinking about as it relates to the arts community? Also, how they see MRAC as playing an important role, both as a funder, but also as members of the community. Again, because we have a range of board members that have been here for between 1 year to 6 years, we're also asking for any highlights that they've experienced during their time with MRAC, including things that have changed, things that they're most proud of, and then also like the things that we're really hoping to happen. And Tricia's going to be rolling off, but I'm sure you're going to be leaving with some hopes and dreams for MRAC. So we're also asking them to talk about the future of MRAC as well. As I mentioned, we've asked these 4 specifically because they're all arts leaders in their own right, but because they represent board members that have served between 1 year to 6 years. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it over to the board panelists tonight. And so we'll just start with introductions. Amanda, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. I am Amanda Cortes. You can also pronounce it in English, Amanda. I am the newest member to MRAC, and I've served for about a year. I'm also a newer resident to Minneapolis. I am originally from Chicago, Southwest side, where I'm actually beaming in from tonight. I am visiting family. And in the Twin Cities, I work at Springboard for the Arts. It's a new position for me. I am the program manager on the community development team. I'm fresh there as well. And I'm also a new mom, something that is definitely front and center now, in the way that I think I'm practicing art. I think I'm definitely drawing on that. I come from an arts family as well. My partner is a visual artist, so I bring all of those things to the table. And I also have a working class immigrant Latinx perspective that I bring to the table. And I will pass the intro off to Alejandra.
Everyone. So Alejandra Pelinka, I'm currently the creative placemaking, excuse me, director for the city of Bloomington. I use she, her pronouns. And I have been a volunteer in the past, an applicant, a panelist for MRAC grants. So I'm very happy to now be on my second year as a board member for MRAC. Prior to my role at the city, I was the director of Northeast Minneapolis Arts Association for 6 years. So that was a great role that really enabled me to connect and build relationships with artists and the arts community. So I'll pass it on from there to Adaobi.
Thank you, Alejandra. Hi, this is Adaobi Okolue. Also MRAC board member, current vice chair. I've been on the board, we're debating 2 or 3 years. I'm the executive director at Twin Cities Media Alliance, which is a media arts organization that focuses on narrative and storytelling centering marginalized communities. I'm really excited about where we're going, and I am going to pass this off to Tricia.
Adaobi. So I'm Tricia, and I work as a director and founder at Public Functionary. It's a Northeast Minneapolis-based arts organization that currently has a studio program supporting emerging artists to find sustainable studio practice and build community. We hopefully will be developing a new exhibition and performance space in the next few years. I also have a long time history as an educator, working as an adjunct at MCAD and the University of Minnesota and St. Mary's. And I work as a consultant for Forecast Public Arts. I'm involved in a lot of public art around the Twin Cities. It's always hard to describe what my work, who am I? I'm definitely someone who just has my hands in everything in the Twin Cities, but also tries to not take up as much space as possible and make pathways for others by, finding myself seated at tables where I have influence. And one of those tables has been MRAC. This is really strange for me to think about this being sort of my final opportunity to represent the organization, though that work over the past 6 years has really been mostly behind the scenes, as board members often are. And I remember I was actually a vice chair for a first term, and then I moved into the chair position. And I remember when the board members approached me to be the vice chair, I was like, I don't even know what to do as a vice chair. I don't know what that means. I'm not ready to be a vice chair. I just joined the board last year. So I became the vice chair, and then a year later they were like, poking me, Tricia, you should be the board chair. I was like, I don't know what a board chair does. And here we are, four terms later, and I'm wrapping up being a board chair. And I think that, in that time, I've really just sort of shaped what it means for me to be a board chair instead of what it means to be a board chair. And I'm really grateful that MRAC is a flexible organization. At least it definitely has been with the current staff and leadership that we have under Kathy, and that this board can, instead of fitting a board identity, can really shape what it means to be a board. And that's not often something you get to do, especially when there is this large amount of public dollars that we are accountable for. But I think that this board really moves with a lot of thought and intention, and always thinking about what it means to be stewards and to be responsible for the public funds. So the time has flown by, and I'm wrapping up my time. So I wanted to just start with a question for Adaobi, who is in the middle. I want to know what keeps you on the MRAC board. Why are you staying? I know why I stayed, but you're in the middle. So
Mhm.
what has prompted you to stay on for the for your next term?
That's a great question, because I think there's a lot of exciting things happening in the art sector right now, right? Like there's a lot of shifts happening in terms of equity, in terms of just reevaluating systems and how we've traditionally operated, and how do we do that in a way that gives everyone access. And that conversation, particularly the way MRAC has been leading that, and particularly the way how quick that's been moving, is really why I myself continue to stay on the board, because those, to me, that for me, that's kind of where my heart stands, is how do we help, what's our role in creating an equitable arts ecosystem? And MRAC has really been doing really interesting, exploring interesting conversations and questions around that. And that gets me excited. I'd love to hear from Alejandra around that, especially coming from also being in the middle as well with me.
Yeah, I think my experience, MRAC was actually the first grant that I ever applied 2 years ago when I was on the board of a small arts organization in Burnsville called Burnsville Visual Arts Society. And so it just kind of opened the doors for me to understand the grant process better and how MRAC worked, and having one of the program officers come out to our group and help explain the process just made it a lot more accessible. So really my journey with MRAC really started there years ago. And so since then with NEMA, we were fortunate to receive some grants that really helped our organization stay afloat and support the efforts that we were pursuing. And then as a panelist, I think it's just been so really inspiring to see the different types of applications coming in, multidisciplinary, from different types of organizations, that some very emerging, some very established, everything in between. So for me, it really opened up my eyes to understand just the arts ecosystem that we have here, that we're fortunate to have here in the Twin Cities, and be a part of, helping to support them through being on the panel and supporting that. So being on the board for me, I think it's also just been exciting because MRAC, especially recently, has been so innovative and just constantly changing. And there's a lot of people and organizations that don't like to constantly change. Some people don't like change at all. And so it's been wonderful to just see MRAC respond and adapt to the current climate, to COVID, and shift things, and really just at a drop of a hat do that, both as staff and board. So for me, that really propels me to just stay committed and see how else I can lend any skills or input or insight that I have along the way. So I want to turn it back to Tricia for a second, just because you have been on for so long, for 6 years and 4 years as chair. I'm just wondering what maybe some highlights have been for you during your tenure with MRAC.
What's been really great is just that the nature of a board is that there's always people rotating on and there's people rotating off. And so I can't say that the last 6 years has been very stagnant. It has always changing with the organization, but also, the three of you were not on the board when I first joined it. And I've worked with each of you now for different amounts of time. And so just always being able to get to know other people from the community that are invested in this work has been really amazing. We've had some really great cohorts that have moved through, and we always do our last board meeting when people leave, and I just always feel so sad when people are leaving. So now I'm like, now I'm the one leaving. But I can think back to, so many board members that rotated off. And in speaking to that, I think it's also just the fact that when I came on, it was because, Damian Strange and Jamil Jude were on the board when I came on. I think Damian might have nominated me. And so knowing that there were others before me that had started planting seeds to move MRAC in the direction that it needed to go in terms of being responsive to the times and figuring out how grant making in this context can be equitable. And so those, the work started long before myself, and it will continue long after I leave the board with all of you and people beyond that. And I think that just connects so much to, nature and the way that things move and the way communities evolve. And I feel just like that's been really the highlight for me, is to be part of this ongoing sort of unfolding story of a grant making organization that started one way but is slowly becoming more and more radical, and we've really been part of that movement in different ways. I would love to ask Amanda, just as you're new on the board, this is your first year, what is MRAC's board culture? Like, coming in, what did you expect for a board, and what has surprised you? Like, what is the culture of this board for you?
I think a lot has surprised me. I also came to MRAC as a panelist first, and my husband had applied for a different grant. Obviously, I didn't serve on that panel, but in that year, I had served on two other panels. One was an NEA panel, and the other was it was like a social services grant, and I was really disappointed with that process. And so I was really excited to join a board that seemed to be moving in some really excellent directions. I met Kathy at an event called Flow on the North Side. I had no idea that she was the director. We just started having a really great conversation. And I said, afterwards, I think you may have even introduced yourself at the end of the conversation, Kathy. And I was like, oh, I'm talking to the person. And so I said, I need to be part of this organization. The language that I hear also being backed by action. There are a lot of organizations out there that are adopting, equity-based language, but when you really get down to the nitty-gritty, the action behind it really isn't there. And so, having served on the panel and then interacted with a few of the board members and Kathy, I think that's what really surprised me, is that MRAC seems to be an organization that does move quickly. They pivot, and that I'm still new, so it's still getting integrated. That we speak and we act in that similar vein. And so that is something that has surprised me. I mean, I brought my baby to a board meeting. Mm-hmm. And not physically, obviously we were social distancing, which made it a lot more possible, but he was in the background, and it was nice to feel comfortable, and also feel empowered to do that. And so I want to continue down that road. I think I want to ask Adaobi. I want to ask something about coming out of the pandemic. This was a question from another panel that I was on. Coming out of the pandemic, and kind of seeing pandemic as portal. Where do you see us going? I feel like that's, we're about to shift, possibly, potentially. Mm-hmm. I want to know where do you think we are headed? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I want to say, Amanda, thank you for that. And that baby was a very cute baby, by the way, that you've been bringing. Definitely adding to the love and beauty in the room. I don't know if there's a Q&A portion, Kathy, but feel free, folks, to drop your questions in the chat, because we're going to run out of questions. I'm going to tell you that right now. So go ahead and drop your questions in the chat so that we can somehow make this a little bit more interactive as much as possible. But where coming out of the pandemic, where are things going? It's really interesting, because I think I've heard, there's talked about there's two pandemics happening, right? The pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and really there's a lot of association with two, because in both pandemics, I'm talking about COVID-19 and then the murder of George Floyd and the uprising that came from that, both have disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities, right? And so part of that, what's came out of that, and I don't think it's that conversation started there, but I think it really, I want to kind of coin back to, Black Lives Matter movement and previous movements before that, that have really elevated the conversation around race, around Black bodies, around brown bodies, around Asian communities, and what's happening in those spaces. And then I think like the pandemic on both sides just ramped that up. And as a result of that, we saw, particularly in arts funding, we saw a lot of emerging opportunities to support BIPOC-led arts organizations specifically, but also other organizations that have been historically marginalized, whether you're talking about rural communities, whether you're talking about folks who have not traditionally had access to funding. And I think where I hope we're going is that that becomes the norm, like that our communities continue to have access to funds and funding to live out the bold visions that we see for ourselves and our organizations. Because what I don't think can happen is that funding cannot be connected to trauma, right? Trauma can't be what spurs funding for everybody, particularly those who are most impacted. And so I think what I see MRAC doing is really taking up a role where we're showing what's possible with funding and how that could be equitable, right? Like we're really trying to, and the interesting part is like part of our funding comes from the state. And so like we really are navigating really tight lines and still trying to be innovative with the funding that we're doing. And so I think MRAC is going to be an example of what it means to really have, to really play a role in equitably distributing funds so that folks can get access to the resources they need to stop playing small and play big. And so that's kind of what my hope is, because like, I feel like the whole environment has to change. And I think MRAC can play a role in shifting that.
I'm just going to chime in real quick because that just excites me for the future of MRAC. I mean, I think that with Tricia, with your leadership, with your partnership, like we really started, we started a lot of like groundwork that I think is ready for everything that Adaobi is talking about now. So I'm super excited about that. I do have a question. And just side note for everybody, I told the panelists that I was going to stay out of this conversation, but I'm too excited now. I mean, I think something that, so Adaobi, you did talk about kind of like the strict rules of the state, right? And you know, we do take those seriously, and we understand that like, in order for change to happen, we do have to be creative, we do have to be innovative, and we have to push the boundaries sometimes. And I think one thing I'm always thinking about, like, if I didn't have to be afraid of certain things, if I had no fear in this world, like, what could I do, right? What could we accomplish together? And I'm curious, and I mean, for any of you, you know, to just kind of indulge me with answering that question.
Well, I do think, you know, just one of the things that I'm really excited to see, and maybe this isn't like as big of a dream as we were talking about, but it is just exciting for me to see that we're offering arts impact for individuals, because I think there's such a great need for individual artists to receive funding. And so the new Arts Impact for Individuals grant, I think, was something that I wasn't sure how, you know, we could navigate, or if it was allowed, or, you know, just kind of all these, you know, bureaucratic kind of questions that I typically come to the table with. But so for me, you know, that was a really big thing that I was excited to see. And I think that just has such great impact, and I'm really excited to see the applications and funding, especially artists at this time when the arts and culture sector has been hit the hardest in the nation of any industry. To see that we're supporting creative workers and artists, I think has really been exciting. So I love that we found a way to make that happen. So thank you to the staff and everyone for finding a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking back to what Adaobi was saying as well, and Kathy, what you followed up on, and giving to individual artists, which was a big move, or changing our programs so that we had individual artists be able to apply. That was like a big step that kind of came through a process. I remember just when the pandemic hit and we were actually able to, and this kind of relates to the portal as well, like everything opened up to where it was like, okay, we're in crisis right now. So kind of the rules go out the door and all of the funders are just doing whatever they need to do in order to support the arts sector so that it doesn't fall apart. Like, let's get the funding out. Let's get the funding out in really flexible ways. Let's not worry about programs because obviously people don't have audiences that they can connect to in the same way. And what was interesting was that MRAC was like, and all of us were like, we just get to do everything we wanted to do now. You know, like now this is the world we kind of wanted to live in where we have a little bit more flexibility. For myself, someone who runs a grassroots arts organization, the flexible funding that has come with the pandemic was the funding I've been dreaming of. You know, we've always needed flexible funding. We've always, for the last 10 years that I've run a grassroots organization, I have been in crisis. It's a constant crisis to try to make the rent, to try to make, you know, the money that we need for programming. And so I think that just really thinking through that and maintaining, you know, this level of flexibility in arts funding and trusting those that run organizations, those that have been doing the work to tell funders what it is that they need. And then for funders to be able to respond to that. I mean, my big dream is that eventually we have alternate forms outside of a written narrative, you know, because I find that to be really limiting in a lot of ways as well. We need more funding as well to be able to give out more, but how are the ways that people can apply without having to actually put together a written narrative? I hope that we can evolve to a point where there's still ways to be accountable with your grant projects, but it doesn't require that privilege of writing. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you think as well, Amanda, about dreams for where we can go.
You know, I think my dream is that, I think, and I said this before, I think at another conversation, and my dream is that the NEA looks at MRAC and says, wow, you're doing such an incredible job with your entire structure, the way that you call, you know, who you define as priorities, potentially the experimentation that you're deploying, perhaps doing audio submissions and focusing more on the visual content over writing, especially for visual artists, individual visual artists, and says we're adopting that. You know, my dream is that we continue to shape the way that funding is going to continue along the road of equity, of undoing and sort of learning the past inequitable ways that funding has been distributed. And that also organizations, not only across the Twin Cities, but the region, begin to rethink how they're serving, who they're serving. And yeah, that is my, you know, that is my hope and dream, that we're planting those seeds and leading by example. It takes me a while to think of these sort of like really big, heady ideas. I'm not good off the cuff, but I think that question came up again. And so I was able to think about those things, but to continue along this path that we're on.
Yeah, and I can guarantee you that this is not the last time we'll be talking about this. So you'll have time to keep thinking about it, Amanda, and to keep bringing your great ideas forward. I do want to bring attention to some of the questions in the chat, because there are a couple of responses also to this conversation. But this is an interesting question. specifically from a grantee that says, I've noticed that most of the recent grants have gone to minority and marginalized groups, which I certainly do understand. Equity fits strong with my personal values. At the same time, a legacy organization like the Civic Orchestra of Minneapolis, 69 years old, with a generally older audience, does not seem to be a good fit in the current grant process. Although the Civic has received prior grants, is there a place for us at present as a legacy orchestra? Curious to hear what you think. I mean, as a staff person, you know, part of this is the reason. I mean, just to remind you that, like, we don't actually make any of the funding decisions. You know, the funding decisions are made by community members like yourselves, and that's really based on criteria, right? So this idea of, like, right now we ask that all applications come in through a written narrative, which is part of the conversation that we're having. So I don't see why a legacy organization would not like be eligible or qualify. You know, our process is that, you know, we do what we can with applicants before a deadline. We work with them one-on-one. We provide workshops. All of those opportunities are available for everyone. And that, you know, I would just encourage anybody that's interested in applying to follow the criteria, right? I think that part of our equity work is not saying that we want to only fund BIPOC communities or disability communities or queer, trans, two-spirited communities or greater metro communities, right? But that we recognize that the system that we have been operating within has not been serving those communities. And so that is a recognition that our system has disadvantaged these groups. And so we're doing what we can internally, whether that be establishing actual relationships with people so that we can kind of learn about what it is in our written narrative. I'm just going to keep coming back to that example because it's already been brought up, and there's another question later about it. What it is within our system that is an actual barrier, right? So is there a place for us as a legacy orchestra? Absolutely, absolutely. I encourage you to apply. You know, respond to the questions as you feel appropriate. We get about, last year we had about 1,600 applications, right? We did about $4 million in funding, but there's no way we could fund all 1,600 applicants. It is a highly competitive process. So I'm happy that what you're noticing is that there has been, I mean, we've put an incredible amount of work to reach out and engage with communities that have historically not been served by our processes. So any movement that anybody sees in that area is a success in our opinion. But does that mean that legacy orchestras no longer have a place? I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Could I add that I think there's a couple of parts to that. I think one, when we're talking about things about communities that have historically been marginalized, I think that first part we really need to underline, right? Historically, that's not just a year, that's not 2 years, that's not 3 years. That's really since the birth of this nation, right? That's embedded in the values of this world. And so when we talk about historically, I think what we start to recognize is that how do we do funding that's more equitable so that those who have not only been historically marginalized, but also have had their works and efforts in programming not been able to like live out bold visions, which has in turn impacted the communities that they serve. So I think that is important to highlight that. And then secondly, I think this also means for legacy organizations I think it's time for all of us to start thinking differently about how we engage our communities. and those who are marginalized within those spaces, right? Every community looks different. So equity in greater Minnesota may look different than equity in Minneapolis or St. Paul. It may not. But I think like it requires us, all of us, to really start thinking about who are we actually reaching? How are we connecting to people? How are people connecting to us? And in turn, if they're not connecting, why? And asking those really important questions. I think doing things the way we've always done things is not helping the larger arts community as a whole. And so I think part of that question, to me, requires all of us to kind of reflect about how we're doing the work, and using like the focus around equity with a number of different communities to think more differently about how that work reaches people.
I think if I could,
go ahead, Amanda.
Mine is really quick. I think just even the idea of legacy, like what is the legacy in this country? And I think Adaobi stated it really well. You know, when I think of legacy, I think of even college admissions is the very first thing that comes up for me. And, you know, Ivy Leagues and who was shut in and who was shut out. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed as a panelist was the criteria. And I think it is out there. And my previous response, I think, is to the question is, I hope that MRAC is inspiring all organizations in the Twin Cities and not the Twin Cities, but the entire region that we're funding, to look inward. That's what it did for me as a panelist. It really made me think of what my blind spots had been. And so if you're being challenged by an application process, I think that's great. I think that's great for growth.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just jump in and just say that MRAC's accessibility program director, Scott Artley, started right around the same time as I did. So it's also just been wonderful to see MRAC's accessibility resources for arts organizations and one-on-one assistance efforts grow. So just in thinking about equity and inclusion and, you know, different ways that communities need to respond to that, you know, I just want to encourage organizations to reach out to Scott to better understand any accessibility needs that their organization could be thinking of and planning for. And then Scott's also been working on MRAC's ADA access plan, which also includes a really great overview of current strategies, barriers, short and long-term goals. But more than anything, I think, you know, Scott's a really great resource to organizations who are also kind of thinking about that question.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we could really, this is, again, I mean, like, we have these types of conversations all the time. This is a constant issue of importance for us, right? As an organization, as staff, as board and staff. So good question. So when we were talking about, Tricia, I think your point, your big dream about alternate forms other than written narratives, there was actually a question in here that says, so does that mean that writers will not be receiving grants?
No, absolutely not. I wasn't talking about writers in terms of, you know, applying for a grant as a writer. I'm just saying that in general, writing a grant narrative can be a barrier for some people. And in terms of equity, I think about my own privilege of being educated. I am able to secure grant applications because I have the privilege of education. I've been able to go to college, which allows me to craft a narrative in a certain way. And so when we think about MRAC's funding and how it can be accessible to people who can't, you know, necessarily craft that narrative in those, you know, sort of guidelines, how can we think about an audio application or a video application or other ways that people can just access the application process? I didn't mean to imply at all that writers would not be eligible. It's not about medium, it's more about application format.
And just, you know, something that we have started in the last 2 years, specifically with Next Step Fund, is that we've been doing some audio. So 2 years ago, we sat down with an artist and had them tell us, you know, their application narrative, and we helped to to get it on the paper. I think in this last year, we actually had audio applications. And then for those of you that aren't familiar with Next Step Fund, that's actually our McKnight funded program. It is time consuming, but I think it's been absolutely necessary. We're learning a lot about alternate forms. So Tricia, your dreams may be coming true sooner than later. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true, right? That some people are great orator, like, you know, storytellers. Some people are great at writing it. I think that part of our equity work has really been kind of recognizing which kind of cultural context is favored in our process and trying to mitigate favoring cultural ways of telling stories, right? There are a few more questions. So let's see. Paul, I see your comment about the silence is deafening. There was that moment where we all kind of were stunned, or not stunned, but really like thinking, right? I think being thoughtful about our responses. Is there a place for aging artists?
Kathy, in that, I just, I didn't know who wanted to take it. And so I was kind of, who wants to take this one? Because I know we all have a lot of thoughts about,
Sure.
And even just this idea of who is not getting funded now. So you have to understand that a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last years is in response to who has not been getting funded. And so things had to be, we're looking at numbers, we're looking at the number of specifically, Native artists that are being funded, Latinx artists that are being funded, and seeing these numbers are zero. Seeing that these numbers from certain counties are not, people are not getting funded, they're not even applying. And so with public dollars, with it being taxpayer money, we really have to understand how we figure out how to get the dollars to people who have not gotten funded in the past. And I really, it's a conversation, this idea of legacy, this idea of being an established organization, that in itself is a privilege. If you are an established organization, you have had pathways, you have had resources, you have had opportunity. And so I know that a lot of people don't, might have other opinions about it, but in the time that I've been board chair, I really believe that we have to think about those who have not had access and who have not had funded, and think about how they begin to shape their legacy, how they become established organizations. And I would hope that MRAC and the State Arts Board worked in better tandem in a lot of ways, so that MRAC serves certain groups, State Arts Board serves other groups, and there's actually like a graduation or a way that organizations can really build up. I have criticisms with the Twin Cities arts sector in general, and the way that it doesn't allow organizations to grow up and to grow into infrastructure. I mean, we have years and years of history only funding programs for grassroots organizations. You can't get anywhere with program grants. So there's just, I think, so much around that topic, but MRAC is meant to have grants available for everybody. And in the past, they haven't been. And so that's what we're working towards.
Thank you. I'm just gonna let that sit. I think that we can kind of take a breath. This has been pretty exciting, and there are heavy moments, right? And this is for everybody that's listening, this is pretty much a day in the life of one of our board meetings. I think it can get pretty heavy because we I think we're a group of people that care deeply, and we know that we're making important decisions, and we're taking all of these things into consideration, right? I'm gonna jump ahead to this question, because I think this is a way to kind of lighten things up. We're running into like the last 13 minutes or so. So what are some of the most interesting moments of your board experience?
I'd love Tricia to jump in as the outgoing chair.
I mean, I think navigating through the pandemic was definitely interesting. What do we do? We were in it with everybody. And I think just, being in the position of being the board chair, making decisions with Kathy, with the executive committee, going remote, all of that is just, it's going to be memorable forever in terms of, navigating crisis. I think the other highlight for me, and just like, what's been exciting, is really bringing Kathy on, and the search process that we went through. I still remember Kathy's interview, and just, kind of seeing you take on MRAC's leadership and navigate through the challenges. I'll be real and honest that it's not, Kathy hasn't just floated through. She's had to, climb upstairs, but she brought a lot of skills and a lot of heart and a lot of intention to it. And as a board, we've challenged her a lot along the way and supported her a lot. And I know that Adaobi and I had a lot of conversations about staying on this board to support Kathy. And when you hire a new leader in an organization, what does it mean to stay behind that leader and kind of help them shape the organization in the way that they want to, and the way that we want them to as well. So it's been really awesome to do that, and to, particularly have a woman of color leading this organization and have a strong board that is able to, step into this sort of leadership in ways that we have not seen in the Twin Cities for as long as I can remember. So those have been the highlights for me.
Wow, I was not expecting that. Thank you, Tricia. I would not have been able to do this without your partnership along the way and your leadership. Thank you. I mean, I think I say this all the time. Like, we've done some really incredible things. We were board members together at one point, and then even in this dynamic, as staff and board, it's been incredible.
It's been hard though. I think that MRAC still has a lot of work to do. And I pass this off as I leave to Adaobi and Alejandra and Amanda here. Like, there's still a lot of work to do, and there's challenges ahead, and it's not easy. So there's more to be done. So
Alejandra, I'm interested in your highlights too, because I think you said you're 2 years, right? And
Yeah, and 2 years is, I just think at the last board meeting I said I was on for 1 year. So I have been on for 2 years, but it does go so fast. And so I think that's why if you're able to commit to a longer duration of being on the board, that just makes a lot of sense to me, because I still feel like I'm catching up. I still feel like I'm, really understanding portions of the organization. And so, one of the things I'd agree with Tricia, just that the pandemic was really something to navigate as an organization and be there for the staff. And really what I saw was that the staff are very dedicated. They're very passionate about their work. They're very involved. They're hard workers. And so what do we do, especially during the pandemic, to help support them and help them feel like they can do their work well? And I'm on the policy committee, which maybe doesn't sound super exciting and a highlight, but to kind of nerdy gals like myself, I like just kind of the clarity that it brings amongst everyone. And so, we talked a lot about just, what does it look like for staff to work at home, and what's the culture of MRAC, and how can we just support that culture so that it works the way that it needs to work. And so for me as a board member, I've just been really trying to understand how I can support the current culture that does work so well with MRAC, and just make sure that the policy makes sure that we're all on the same page and we're supporting staff, we're supporting Kathy the way that they should be supported. So I think during the pandemic, just seeing the way that those policies developed was something that was exciting, just to see that there was real intention around even the maternity leave and other kind of policies that we've been putting together over the last year. So that's been exciting, because it really gets you more of that inner working side of things in policy and creating things so that we're really clear with each other. And so we make MRAC a healthy, desirable place to work.
Yeah. And Amanda, I know you've been, did you start virtual? We haven't seen you in person, have we? I don't think we have.
I don't think that we have. I did start virtual. I think the last in-person thing that I may have done was I think the panel. I think to me, one of the most interesting things I've seen is because I I've seen the staff from both sides, you know, having served on the panel and the board, and how nimble they are with the volume of work that they handle. It's incredible how quick and how much information they are holding and they are processing and supporting with. Just the level of interaction that they have with the board has been something that's been really interesting for me to watch. It's been incredible. I don't think I've been to many board meetings as an employee of a nonprofit organization. And so that relationship that we have is something that's been really interesting to witness. And I want to continue to pay attention and watch that grow.
Yeah, I think for me, I've been on the board. We're contesting 3 years. I really feel like I thought it was 2 years. I have a hard time imagining it's been 3 years, which speaks to how quick this all goes. Because I feel like an OG in this, but yeah, I think I feel like when I came on the board, we were still we were in the early phases of thinking about what could be different about arts funding, and we were still deep, and we still are deeply embedded in a lot of the, you know, legacy and institutional ways of funding, but knowing that that wasn't working and figuring out how that's going to change. I feel like now, like the MRAC I walked into and the MRAC that is now, it almost feels like night and day to me, in the sense of how the kind of conversations we're having, how we're challenging what is possible, how we're saying what's our role in, you know, the arts community. And not only arts funding is part of that, but also, like, ultimately this is about the arts community, because the arts community is really shaping, as we saw in this past year, is creating spaces and opportunities for us to, like, really envision what's possible and really to start thinking differently about the ways we navigate space and navigate our worlds, right? And I think, like, ultimately we ultimately are looking to support that community. And so we always look back, and I think all of us are in the arts community in some fashion, right? Outside of just grant making. I know for myself as a media artist as well, but I think just looking at that and being really, yes, the staff being nimble, but everything, the staff, the board, how we're looking at funding is all been in service to how do we better support the arts community. And I love how we continue to center that question. And I feel like that centering has made really radical shifts in the way that we're doing our work. And that to me is like, it seems like the easy thing. It seems like the duh moment, but like a lot of times, you know, we see time and time again, organizations across all sectors, we have our mission, we have our focus, but you lose sight of that, right? It starts becoming about like trying to get more out, try to do the day-to-day, and you lose focus about who that work is supposed to impact. And I love how we continue to center the arts community, particularly those that haven't been served by it. And we continue to put that in the center of the conversation and let our egos get out of the way ultimately. And I love that.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that, Adaobi. That's so important. And, you know, creativity has always been essential to recovery. And as we're thinking about resiliency and the impact of COVID, not just on the arts community, but our communities in general. You know, we've seen how artists and arts organizations have been essential many times throughout this year in Minnesota, both after the death of George Floyd, but also during COVID, and resiliency efforts to uplift, to connect people, to add just to the overall livability factor of our communities, and also to support the local economy. So I think, you know, for me, just thinking a lot around articulating and explaining the important connection of how the arts and culture sector contribute to our economic resiliency, as well as our social and cultural resiliency efforts.
Amen.
All right. Yes. You know, I plan to do some kind of a wrap up, but I feel like ending with each of you talking about like the things that have been most interesting and exciting, and then with those, especially those last 2 points, so like that we really continue to center the arts community, and we let our egos get out of the, like we make sure that our egos are out of the way so that we can really center the arts community is totally key. And then the last point about creativity being essential to recovery, economic resiliency, social, every kind of everything that makes up life for human beings, right? I think one of the things we talk a lot about at MRAC is how do we humanize the grant making process when it can be such a dehumanizing process. So I just want to thank you all for taking the time. First, you know, the board members, my board members, you put so much time into just like MRAC already. And so taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to come in and really share your thoughts and your feelings and your opinions, and hopefully giving our listeners a little bit of insight and a glimpse into like why you're doing what you do, and how MRAC came to be the organization that it is today is definitely because we have leaders like you on our board. So thank you for taking the time and being so generous with your honesty. And then I want to thank everybody else that attended, because you know, it's nice outside. It's kind of warm, but there are so many other things you could do other than like listening to us talk. So thank you for joining us. For anybody that didn't make it, or if you want to watch it again, we will have it. We've recorded this, and so we'll be sharing that link through our newsletter, and then also on our Facebook page and at our website. So you'll be able to come back and watch it again. There were so many like important and good like parts of this conversation that I think I'll definitely be going back and listening to, and like maybe even bringing up at a future board meeting. So thank you, everyone. That's a night. That's exactly. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.